Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive!
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space, our bonus episodes, and the trek continues. The wars continue in the stars. That's right, we're talking Red Dwarf, not those two things you might have just been thinking about. Our trek through the entire Red Dwarf back catalogue is trekking on. We have done series 1 through 7, almost all of 7. It got to a place where we were getting on a bit, and so I cut that one back. So we're going to continue with the rest of Series 7 and go right into Series 8. And after that, we'll obviously continue with Back to Earth and the rest. But for this week, you are getting our completion of Series 7 and the rest of Series 8. So I'm going to hand over to myself and Julian, and you can enjoy.
Maybe we can breeze through Epideme. I just can say, immediately it fits exactly the pattern you were talking about of sort of like, this is an idea. I love the idea of using the universal translator to talk to a virus, right? That's awesome. But nothing in this episode really makes sense. And nothing in this episode is really that satisfying. There are a couple twists, but the entire plot depends on this epideme virus only being in one part of the body at the time, and then being able to like chase it into another part of the body with antivirals, which if you have antivirals, why are you chasing it into a part of the body so you can cut it off? So they cut off Lister's, right arm when he begged them to be sure to cut off the left, but it went into that. And then at the end, there's another fake out where, there's this whole fake out of like, they're going to get the cure, but the virus really tricked them. There was no cure. This was all to keep, Dave alive. It's a twist. And then there's another twist is Kachansky allows basically like, kills Dave, stops his heart. Then somehow, the virus takes over. It makes people zombies. So it bites Kachansky. Kachansky somehow knew this was about to happen and had like a fake arm that was made from a real body part that the virus went into. Then she cuts it off, even though it's not really attached to her, just for the shock value. And then we're supposed to believe that in that bite, the virus transplanted all of itself into the arm. Like, there are things like that just, there's a good idea here, right? A sentient virus that you can talk to and it kind of talks like Max Headroom, all that stuff. That's good, right? That's legit, good idea. But the story itself doesn't, what is that about,
No, I 100% agree. I think all the interactions with the epideme virus itself are actually really good. I really enjoy. There's even a moment in this where they trick it, which I really like, where Crichton sort of says, "Well, I've got no beef with you. We are both sort of non-biological. Whatever. You can't infect me, so I'm not so worried." And you've obviously collected, and I like the idea as well. A bit like with Legion, every person that you infect, you gain some of their knowledge, you gain some of that experience and information. So you must be like, all this wealth of information and knowledge you have. How could we make Starbug better? And it reels off this thing, and it'll make it 300% more efficient. And he's like, thank you very much. That will actually allow us to get to. That happens it happens in this one. Sort of, we can get there faster. And you're like, okay, that's a good idea. I like all this stuff where you are talking with the virus, as you say. But some of the other stuff just doesn't make sense. Like you're saying, I'd never thought about that with Kachansky in the arm. But if it's not attached, it's dead. So if it's dead, would the virus not want to go into that? Because the point is, it wants to go into a living host because it absorbs it until that thing dies, and then it coats it in ice. Yeah, it doesn't work.
Yeah. So that crewman that they find at the beginning, right, on the Leviathan, Caroline Carmen, she was a former Red Dwarf crew member. What?
Yeah.
How
Irrelevant.
did she get from? How was she one of Lister's former crushes? Presumably on the Red Dwarf. I mean, and this is another case where it's like, well, so how did she leave the Red Dwarf? But we're 3 million years out. Did the Leviathan, like, she transferred from the Red Dwarf to the Leviathan, and the Leviathan also just started drifting for 3 million years? Why would you even say this is a former crew member? It adds nothing to the plot that he had a crush on her, except, like, okay, she attacks him in his quarters, and there's some kind of gross out, zombie stuff as parts of her body come off in his mouth. But,
again, though,
you could doesn't make sense.
You easily solve that in the same way they did it in Justice. You just say, we can't see her because she's in a block of ice. However, on this, I've just done a scan and we found on the crew manifest, it's this crew member, and here's a picture of her. And look, she's incredibly attractive.
Right.
So when she comes out, and she comes after, you can have the same interaction with List. In fact, List, her coming after Dave makes sense because she's the first living thing she comes across. Not a problem. But he doesn't even, when she's in, when she comes after him, he doesn't even think it's Caroline Carmen. He thinks it's Christine Kachansky because she sneaks up in bed, doesn't she? So again, there's nothing like he's like, oh, okay, Caroline Carmen, I can have that, maybe try that. Nope, doesn't make any doesn't matter. Doesn't make any sense. It's
you're
irrelevant.
Absolutely right. I mean, it's not only you're dead on, it would have been easily solved, and you're so right that we don't even get a moment where he says, I've been lusting after Kachansky and she's not into me. I'll never measure up to Holo, Dave. But, now I've got a second chance with Caroline Carmen. No, we don't even get that, which would justify, at least for a moment, at least that would give us a character beat.
Yeah, it's bizarre. They keep doing these things. But, it's not... It's like... It's like they're trying to set up some pun jokes or some smaller jokes for that moment, because again, like the joke is he sort of he gives off this thing about what she's like, and she's a great kisser, and he's then we can ask her when she comes round. He's like, well, she might not remember me. Well, that's it for that joke.
Yeah,
you've done better than this before. Like, stop doing it. So. Epideme, we are going to breeze through because I think Epideme, like you say, it's fine. It comes this thing, but it's just naff. I mean, the end result is you end with, again, you sort of talk about being brave. They try, it's not. They've got one more episode, but the new status quo is that Lister now only has one arm, and that's sort of where you're left.
And they say to be continued, right, at the end of this episode. The only thing that continues is that he has one arm. Yeah. And by the end of the next episode, he'll have both arms back. How is that to be continued? I mean, it wasn't like at the end of the second episode, they go, Rimmer's gone, to be continued, because he's still going to be gone next time, Yeah.
I don't know. It's almost like they're trying to fool you into thinking you're getting a two-parter at the end of the series. But then you get Nanaki and this idea that, again, a new idea that, in fact, it's an idea that's complete crap as well, that Crichton has had microscopic, or as he says, itty-bitty little nanobots going through his system that help him self-repair. And he lost them at some point when they lost Red Dwarf. Fine. But we also know that he's had accidents and other things have happened when, so when did they lose Red Dwarf? Was it series 6?
Yeah, it's the end of 5, right? Because all of 6, they're on the Starbug.
Yeah. That's right. So 5 is on Red Dwarf, isn't it? Series 5, they
Yeah.
are actually on Red Dwarf. Okay. So if you had nanobots, when they crash on Terraform, which is the Rimmer Psyche planet, the Psy world, and he's all
Hmm.
cracked, he's all smashed up, why does he have to send his hand back to get help to get himself repaired if he's got nanobots?
Well, that would have been just after he lost them, because there is this reference to like the despair squid, which is back to reality, the last appearance of Red Dwarf. So in theory,
Well, no, because
it,
Back to Reality is episode 6 of Series 5. Terraform is episode 3. I'm going through
oh
on
yeah, you're
IMDb.
right. You're right.
So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
even
yeah.
before that. So
No, you're right.
it
Yeah, no,
does.
I mean, these nanomachines have not existed previously. I mean, this is a
No,
retcon. You're absolutely right.
yeah. But it's another one where you're like, oh, okay, seems to come out of nowhere. And again, if this technology existed, right? If you had, and
Yes.
granted, I'm not going to talk about Red Dwarf because Red Dwarf, they actually acknowledged in Series 8 that Crichton was built hundreds of years after Red Dwarf was launched. But if Crichton had this technology and they have this capability, why, way back when, did he not sort of say, I could resurrect the dead with, all that white powder that we had kicking about. I don't know what we're done with it now, but it was all the crew. Yeah, I can resurrect them all with this technology.
Well, if
Again, I
there's one
know
thing
it's
I learned in college is that white powder fixes everything.
yeah,
No, you're
but this,
right. I mean, Crichton, this should have come up sooner, right? But I
yeah,
still like the idea. I mean, mostly because I like where it's going to go. That I mean, and at least it references the despair squid. I dig that. I mean, and keep in mind, like for listeners, like all through 6, they're in theory chasing Red Dwarf.
mm,
And, here they found, it doesn't make sense why they didn't sense it, between 5 and 6, but there's a planetoid near where they were with the despair squid and back to reality. And that planetoid reads as Red Dwarf. Well, it's the remains of Red Dwarf. It makes no sense why the nano machines have, made a miniature version of Red Dwarf that they were
yeah,
sailing around, and that's what they
yeah,
were tracking. I mean, that makes no sense.
no.
Um,
But I'll tell you what, right? I'll give you a fix for all this again, right? So instead of them having been in Crichton, which makes no sense, when I'm just looking at past episodes. How about when they go to the station where they were creating the look virus and sexual magnetism and they in quarantine, so Rimmer gets the hollow virus, right? So that's a
right.
place dealing with advanced technology. Why could they not say in that? Oh well, actually, yeah, I picked them up off that thing. We picked them up. We thought they could be useful. Then I lost them when we were in quarantine. There you go, solved.
Right.
2 episodes later, they've stolen Red Dwarf, and you're back to it. Like, there are ways of doing this. If you, all I'm doing is looking at IMDb and looking at past episodes and going, yeah, we'll plug it into that. It's a slight retcon, fine, but it's not as big as the one they try and force on us.
Yeah, I mean, you should be writing this. I mean, again and again, you're coming up with better solutions to, ways to get to what they want to do with the script and with the plot
Mm.
than what they're doing, which again, consistently seems outside of Stoke Me a Clipper kind of half-assed.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the end result of this is they clearly want to get to this whole series. I'd say is about setting up a new status quo. It's a transitional series, isn't it? That's how it feels. Right, we're losing Rimmer, bump, done that. We're gaining Kachansky, bump, we've done that. Okay, let's sort of set up this new status quo between them all, how they all are, and then as a final piece, we're going to reintroduce Red Dwarf, the ship. So we've got to get them off Starbug and get them back on the ship. That's it. That, as far as I'm concerned, the BBC gave them a mission statement of by the end of this series, we want you to have 4 crew members on a ship on Red Dwarf.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I think they were going for.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, you're completely right. I mean, I will say that, if there's one moment that stands out for me in this episode, it's when we see Holly again.
Mm.
And it's the male Holly. It's not the
Hmm.
female Holly that they, replaced Holly with. And I just have in my notes Holly multiple
Yeah.
exclamation marks. Like it is, it's so much fun to see him again, and I do think that he might be part of why the next season works much better for me. Um, that he is part of that dynamic.
Mm.
That crew dynamic that works. Um, you know, um, it's fun seeing that they, like it's a silly joke that they remake Lister's arm, but they also make Lister muscular. That's
Yeah.
going to be instantly dropped. I love that they remake Red Dwarf. Um, we don't really get the twist to that until the first episode of the next season. But it's too big and Starbucks miniature.
Mm.
Okay, like, haha, it's a cliffhanger, haha. Okay, I mean, it's not great, but I mean, I would say this is still probably, this might be my second favorite episode, but after Stoke Me a Clipper, they're all kind of clumped together.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I mean, the end result, and again, the last bits of this aren't too bad. I mean, there's some interesting little bits. Um, but the idea again of it's just little things that bother me, like the idea that they've actually this ship, the nanobots and stuff, have actually been like floating around in Lister's laundry for the last 2 years. And I get the joke that he doesn't change his clothes often, but you've made it clear that Crichton's the one that does his laundry all the time.
Right. Yeah.
So it, it's like they don't even follow their own internal logic. And we've said this about some of the films that we've reviewed. Like, if you're going to set the rules,
Yes.
follow your own internal logic, and this just doesn't. And that's what I find it infuriating at times. It just,
No,
it's
that's
fine, it's
very
funny.
fair.
Mm. Um. So yeah, but I do love the return of Norman Lovett as Holly. I think he's great. Not that Hattie Hadridge wasn't good. I really enjoyed her as Holly. I think she had great moments. But Norman Lovett is Holly. Let's be honest. And he hasn't missed a beat. He's still great. And we do get some. He does do some good stuff in Series 8. Um, but yeah, but overall, I agree. I think apart from Stoke Me a Clipper, I think I could miss Series 7. One of the things I've been thinking about, when we get to the end, we will talk about favorite episodes and that sort of thing. But I often think about what will I return to in this, and often I've returned to those as we sort of refer to them as the classic years. That's sort of like, for me, that's sort of like 3, 4, 5 ish. Sort of like some of 6 and some of the early stuff, but mainly 3, 4, 5 is what I return to the most. I could probably miss 7 and
Hmm.
never to return to 7. I don't think I'd miss a great deal.
I think that's very fair. I mean, I think Stook Me a Clipper is by far the best, and it is classic. Um, as I've been going, I have been rating these, and I've also sort of been making a designation of like what I think are classic episodes. Um,
Mm.
and what are those essential episodes that I would return to over and over again. Um, and I think I said that most series, the first like 4, 5 series have out of 6 episodes, 2 or 3 that I consider classic.
Mm.
I could maybe narrow it down to 2 a season, but I can't imagine telling somebody to watch Red Dwarf and not see and not tell them to watch 2 at least episodes out of those seasons. Um,
Mm.
and then we get to 6, and Rimmer World is the clear standout. The rest are weaker. I think you're right, in saying that this is a weaker season than that. Um, but Stoke Me a Clipper is the only one that I could even recommend. Um, and and then you have the problem, like, because you're messing with the formula so much. Now, I like that they're doing that. I like that Kachansky's on board. But
Mm-hmm.
especially once you get to 7, and once you get to 8, now you're kind of in serialized narrative territory where, in series 7 and especially 8, you can't give an episode to somebody and say, just watch this episode.
Yeah.
They're going to have to, understand what's happened in between episodes in a way that the earlier episodic seasons don't require.
No, I agree with that. Definitely. It's, yeah. I mean, let's be fair. I'm looking at series 8 now. If we move on to series 8, that it starts with a 3-parter and then has a 2-parter sort of stuck towards the end. So, when we sort of say about favorite episodes, whatever later on, it could be interesting. But they have though. So we go into series 8. This again came 2 years later. So it was 1997 with series 7. Series 8 comes in 1999, and which is crazy watching it. I'm watching this now and thinking I still remember this quite vividly now, but it's 20 years ago. This came out, or more than that now, 21 years ago. So it's that's mad. But this series sort of it starts with a 3-part episode, Back in the Red, which is obviously Back in the Red referencing them being back on Red Dwarf, and the Nanos have recreated Red Dwarf, and they've recreated the entire crew, and the show opens with them, as with the cliffhanger. It's sort of they've got like a mini, they're like a little mini fly flying around, but the ship starts to adjust itself, and they end up sort of. It looks like they're getting larger, but the ship is getting smaller as they fly through it, and they end up demolishing a starbug as they fly in, including flying up a rat's bottom, which I know is pure and silly, but makes me laugh quite a lot.
It's also well done in the CGI.
Yeah,
I mean, it is legit well done.
And basically, the show reintroduces a new status quo in that this episode opens with what could quite easily be a skit from the first 2 series. But you find out that Rimmer has returned, or there is a Rimmer in it, and there is a Lister, and they are in prison. And then the series sort of backtracks, or the first 3 episodes backtrack, and you find out how they ended up in prison, and the fact that Red Dwarf has a prison at all. So yeah. And then it goes on, and there's a couple of standalone episodes, and then we get through to the finale. But this Back in Red, this sort of almost like let's call it a feature-length episode, because although it's got cliffhangers, it is one long story, isn't it? Like it's got some interesting bits in it. But what are your thoughts really going into series 8?
I love it. I mean, I think Back in Red Part 1 is basically everything I felt I was missing in Series 7. It is working. It's flowing. It feels coherent. I mean, even like you said, even the flying up a mouse's butt, and what you haven't said is that Starbug is pulling the mouse forward on its front end, as it's I mean, it's very well done. Even around there, the cast says he warns them about brown alert, and they say there is no brown alert, and he says, "Well, there is now. Don't say I didn't warn you." And it's the comedic timing is right. I mean, that sounds like that could be a joke that could easily fall flat, and in Series 6, it would have fallen flat. Now, to your theory that they need a studio audience, the studio audience is back for Series 8. But that timing is working. The episodes are flowing. And, there are some weaker episodes in this series. But, I mean, Back in the Red, I feel like, is just a sort of... I mean, I have a note, that Back in the Red 1 is sort of like... outside of Stoke Me a Clipper, I mean, this is way above anything in Series 7.
Yes, agreed. And this is the thing where I remember watching this when I watched this back in the day, thinking and being disappointed with it. But watching it now, this first episode is really good. and it sort of it introduces some fantastic elements. I mean, like I said, that the whole opening bit where we find out that Rimmer isn't talking to Lister for whatever purpose. So he's basically sort of Lister's now set himself a mission to annoy Rimmer to an extent that he's now going to sort of basically shout at him. It's all, like I say, it's firing on all cylinders. And there's even some moments like they've been arrested when you find they were taken from the wreckage of the Red Dwarf, of the Starbug that they crash. Lister is taken back to the sleeping quarters, like the usual sleeping quarters. So it's good to see that some of this, they're obviously slightly redone as set dressing, but to go back to those things. And he's sat there thinking, like, whatever's going to happen. And you get the return of Rimmer. The Nanos have brought back a living Rimmer.
Yeah.
But not just a Rimmer. Like, it's the moment when he starts saying things like up the ziggurat, lickety split, and sort of like all boyo and all this other stuff. And Lister's response is, "Oh, you're the old Rimmer. Like, you haven't grown and changed. You're still you." And I love that response, and it's great to see him back and being the obnoxious moron he is from the first couple of series. So yeah, I do like. I think this is great, and I think the idea of having all the crew back does introduce a new dynamic. That we never really got to see them interact with other people and stuff. So you get to do see this, and I think. I forget the guy's name. I'm just going to find out. The actor who plays Mac McDonald, as Captain Hollister.
Oh yeah.
He gets to do some good stuff in this, and he becomes not a main character, but he's definitely sort of a B level sort of secondary character, and he's pretty entertaining in this. Like again, and there's a great moment in this as well. I think it might be in part 2 or part 3. I'm not sure where. You find out more about him as well, which is quite funny. But yeah, no, I think this first episode is really strong, and it did reassure me that actually this show's back on track, and has actually got something to say. Like it's actually got something to, it's got something to start to keep me engaged that I don't think Seven had. Seven tried to be bigger and failed. This tries to be sort of bigger in a different way, or at least change the status quo, and succeeds much more effectively.
Yeah, I agree completely. And it's funny again. It's lively again. I love the idea that just to start off, I love the idea that the nano machines would reconstruct the crew as well. That's such a clever little thing. But this is by far the most radical, upsetting change to the status quo of the show. The entire status quo of the show from day one was the entire crew is dead. Here is the paltry gang of 3 last survivors, plus Holly, later, plus Crichton, last season, plus Kachansky. I mean, compared to bringing back the entire crew of the Red Dwarf, being on Starbug for a season doesn't even register as a change. I mean, replacing Rimmer with Kachansky, I mean, that's nothing. This is the entire premise of the show in which that cast exists. And yet, so, I mean, to me, that proves the problem isn't change. The problem isn't screwing with the status quo of Red Dwarf. It's just that it didn't work. And here that chemistry is working, and it's working, almost right from the beginning. I mean, it begins with that flash forward where it feels like the old days. I mean, which symbolically is kind of like announcing a return to form. You're right. It's poignant seeing Rimmer, not having evolved. He feels like that same character. He still thinks he's going to be an officer, which, Dave's like, oh God, you still think you're going to be an officer, don't you? That's all great. I mean, and it's even got so many little things where the timing is just working. The doctor examines the cat, who of course they've never seen before. And the doctor says his organs are color coordinated, and his heartbeat and his pulse each make a separate rhythm. It's like, he is the coolest cat. Now, of course, all of that is ridiculous, but we don't care because it's working and it's clever, and the whole episode doesn't revolve around that, And that the captain's fantastic. And like seeing Holly last episode, I see the captain. We have more fun stuff with that captain in this series than we do in that first episode. That whole first half of that first episode just feels stale and stodgy, and it's working, it's doing its job, but it feels very stale and stodgy. Here, the captain is legitimate funny.
I agree. I think this whole series has got some fantastic secondary characters. I mean, one of the things, like I say, being in prison, it also introduces. I mean, let's say Mac McDonald as Captain Hollister. The other one that comes in, I mean, granted, it comes in part 2 when you're finally introduced to the prison. Is what's his name? Is Graham McTavish?
The warden.
The warden. So Graham McTavish. I don't know if you've seen Preacher.
Yes.
I think this is Preacher. So Graham McTavish is the saint of killers.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. And this is so. In this, obviously, he plays the warden, who's clearly sort of like just as psychotic, but in a much camper, sort of slightly menacing way. And he's brilliant fun. Like, I really am enjoying this. He's funny, and like you say, everyone's bringing something different. They're trying something different. They're having fun. The point is, it's funny, and they're having fun. That's what seems to be the difference. I mean, there are scenes. Again, I'm going to jump all over back in the red a little bit, but we find, later sort of that Lister sort of says, like, we've got to sort of try and get some evidence together for all our story for it to make sense. Otherwise, it just sounds like complete nonsense. But the only way we can do that is there's stuff on Starbug that we need. He sends Living Rimmer to go get. It's the crew's confidential files, and he finds the Look virus and the sexual magnetism virus. And so, them being reintroduced is quite good fun. But then the fact that, like, Rimmer uses and manipulates people using those confidential files and the Look virus and stuff and the sexual magnetism is really funny. Like, he goes to an evening, the captain invites him to an evening soiree, and he's taken the sort of the sexual magnetism, and then Rimmer basically sort of ends up sleeping with all these women at this dinner party in different ways. And eventually sort of like has to sort of weasel his way out of it and stuff. And it's really funny. I think, it's done really, really well. And so having this wide, like you said, it's not changed, because having this wider cast is actually bringing something new to the show, something more to the show. And it's working. So, yeah, no, I'm really enjoying this. The first 3 episodes of this actually really work for me as a piece, as a single sort of story about how it all ends up coming together. And again, some great ideas. The use of the psychotropic drugs for them to be in a sort of a sleep state, but believe that they're in reality. So we're bringing back the AR machines and everything else, so they can see that if they do what they say they're going to do, they do prove their innocence. And I love the joke that they prove their innocence, but in doing so, they actually end up committing other crimes that replaces they were going to do 2 years for the crimes they were committed for, but in proving their innocence, they've also committed other crimes. It's
abusing classified info. Which has a 2-year sentence. So yeah.
It's very good. I think it's solid. I think it's really funny.
Oh, I agree. And the other thing that occurs to me is, you were talking about the extended cast, but outside of Kachansky, who doesn't, she has a few lines and they work, but outside of, she doesn't really have all that much to do. But our extended cast, including, from Holly, Rimmer, Lister, Kat, they and Crichton all have great moments of their own. Crichton, I love this resurrected Red Dwarf, kind of like, okay, so they don't remember any times past, but they know the ship is bigger because it's made to its original design plans, right? And it's kind of a trope that, like, everything gets bigger and better. Like, I mean, you see it in 6 where, Starbug gets refitted, and it happens in 7 yet again. But so Red Dwarf is bigger and better. So they're like, okay, how did the ship get bigger? Also, why are we 3 million years in deep space? Who's this cat? We don't know. And then they examine Crichton, and Crichton is examined by a psychologist, and he says, Crichton explains, that the counselor is dead. And he says, well, so you're saying I'm dead now? And he says, no, of course not. You were resurrected by nanomachines, and he says, and he explains how Crichton was built after the counselor died, and he's evolved since, and he says, he has some character faults he's very proud of, all of that is just hilarious and working. Then Crichton, again, struggling to say no to being set back to his factory resets. Kochanski tells him, think of them on the loo. And he still can't quite get it when he's forced to, to approve of resetting him back to factory resets, which ultimately doesn't matter because they just do it anyway later.
Yeah.
But he takes a gun and kidnaps all of them and makes them go to the bathroom, pull down their pants, and sit on the toilet. And then he stands there and the actor's brilliant as he sort of parades down the aisle, staring at them, laughing, saying, "You all look ridiculous."
Well,
it's just wonderful.
And the counselor, the psychologist, is wearing stockings and sort of it's being sort of hidden away and stuff. So there's great little moments, because I also like his moments. He does talk about his character flaws, and he goes through them. He sort of demonstrates them. And the final one is anger with random acts of violence. And he ends up just slams it down on his hand, and I think it's great. It's brilliant. It's so funny. And again, and you get the medical doctor examining Crichton as well, and sort of and all this other stuff. And he says go behind the. There's 2 moments. He sort of says go behind the curtain and fill this. And he hands him like a jar to pee in, and he comes out and he's filled it with flowers like a vase, because that's all he can do. I'm just really enjoying this. It's back on track. It's funny. I'm laughing. I'm smiling throughout. I mean, again, you say about the moments. I mean, the moments of ridiculousness. Again, like say, if it had been if it had been in 7, there are moments in this that if they'd been in 7, I probably would have pointed out and gone, "That's rubbish." How's that work in continuity? But because this is funny, and because I'm laughing and enjoying it, I'm more willing to accept it. As the point being, I think we sort of briefly discussed it off air, and we'll discuss it now, is the fact that the Nanos brought back all the crew, including Rimmer, but they didn't bring back Kochanski. But is that, because the Christine Kochanski we know is from another dimension. So was that a choice they made? Did they just not bring her back? That could be a real issue. But I'm not really thinking about it. Also, we have an entire scene where the cat makes a bunch of blue midgets dance, which again is ridiculous, but it's wonderful.
Oh, it's wonderful. I mean, that is a set piece. As much as the Rimmer experience, almost that good. It is just, I mean, the CG is sort of not quite up to current standards, but still really good for its time. I mean, in fact, the special effects this whole series are just a massive leap forward from the previous one. And really feel much more up to snuff for me. Not that matters to me. I mean, I love the early stuff, but there is this kind of like uncanny valley in the middle where I think those flames are okay, but I'd rather they either be good or I just see the model hanging from lines, which I'm fine with. But I mean, that is a set piece with the dancing blue midgets there.
But I like the fact it has a payoff, because he does that in order to impress the air traffic control kind of sort of thing they find they have in the hangar bay, and that you get this really attractive sort of black girl there, and she's sort of like she's wowed by him a little bit, and she agrees to go on a date with him whilst they're trying to escape.
Yeah.
And then it pays off that when they actually do escape, or when they actually do try and escape later on, it's sort of like a much older, larger sort of black woman, and she's sort of a bit more in your face. And he's sort of like, I can't, no dancing, no amount of dancing is gonna, convince that basically. And I think it's great. I think it's like I say, the jokes are working, and the cast are clearly back on track, really. But again, like I say, it's just the fact that they are giving them each a sort of a moment to shine and a moment to do something. Is why I think this is working so well. Even the fact when they do something ridiculous, like they introduce the Dwibblers,
Yes.
Dwayne Dibblers sort of crew. It's not great. It's a bit silly. I mean, why would Christine Kachanski know about Dwayne Dibley?
Right.
But it's fine. It's not it's not a deal breaker. But some of the other stuff is. In fact, that scene particularly is when it works. Is Crichton has been reset, and he's going around. And he comes in looking for his mop heads, and they're using them as hair to look like Dwayne Dibley. And his re-corruption is really like, it just makes me laugh. He's I know you, sir. I know you well. You were Wayne Wibley. He's I feel something's coming. It's that's good.
Yeah.
Just the way he delivers that line. And he returns to the Crichton that we know and love, is just really funny and really satisfying. So, yeah.
Well, and I agree with you that there are things here that we would complain about if they were in the previous series, to be honest, because they wouldn't have worked. They wouldn't have the flow wouldn't be right. The timing wouldn't be right. It would just feel a little stale on the page, so to speak. And here, like, that's a perfect example where really it doesn't make any sense that there's this whole plot in which he is struggling to say no to being factory reset. Then he kidnaps those people and takes them into the John or the Lou, and then they just say, okay, that's a bridge too far. We're just going to reset you anyway. He's been reset, so all of this stuff has been purged. Yet when he sees Dwayne Dwibley, very quickly he gets excited, as you say. He says, "I can feel my files corrupting." And it's so much fun, and the timing is right, and the shots are good. Everything just feels on par. It's got that movie magic, and you can forgive it its trespasses.
Yes. And I think that's such a big part of it, isn't it? If you're enjoying it, and if it's the majority is good, like, you can forgive those little trips that it has. And so I do forgive it those things and enjoy it a lot more. And I do feel like, like I said, when I'm watching season 7 and I'm thinking, yeah, this is the show falling apart. With series 8, for the most part, I'm thinking, do you know what? This is a new show, a new type of show, and it's getting way back on track, and I'm really enjoying it for those first 3 episodes.
Yeah, agreed. And I think there's so much that works, that are little moments. I mean, when Kachanski comes on to Lister in the lift, and she's, God, you're gorgeous. I mean, the acting is working. Like you said, I mean, they seem like they're having fun. As they're trying to convince Rimmer, and Lister says, officers aren't men of honor. They're head cases. And I thought, that's funny, but it also perfectly encapsulates the difference between Rimmer and Lister. That, Rimmer looks up to the establishment, and Lister says, no, they're all like you, Arnold. And I found that's fascinating. I mean, we're eight seasons into a show that centrally was about that dynamic of the odd couple, one of whom aspired to the establishment and the other was, tune in, tune on, drop out. And we're still getting lines that clarify things for me, where I think, yeah, I mean, Lister's saying the entire establishment is just like you, Arnold. And then we see in these episodes that the captain, the reason he identified Arnold's ploy so easily is because the only reason he's
Yes.
captain is that he blackmailed people.
Yeah. And I love that reveal when he sort of says, "If people realise I was just Billy the Donut Boy, they would be all over." And I was like, it's a great moment. That you're right. That is, it's a funny little moment itself, but it calls back to the fact that like Rimmer's not alone in this. They're all just as just as sort of power hungry and loopy as he is. It just so happens that Captain Hollister may be a little bit more competent than he is.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we haven't even mentioned that, as they're in this artificial reality, they realize that, we've seen this before in sort of like Back to Reality, but, they realize that, oh, we're in an artificial reality. We've got to escape.
Mhm.
And they look for an escape, and then they trigger what they believe is the escape. And then we have a fucking claymation sequence.
Yeah.
Like, we get to see Red Dwarf in claymation, and it's just glorious. It's just like, what am I watching? And, whether it's seeing the entire, like, this is so much of what I love about Red Dwarf. Like, going back to those early episodes where you just think, what am I watching? Where, we see Red Dwarf blow up, or we see these future echoes, and it's like, you're in the second episode. What am I watching? This is so crazy. In these 3 episodes, the entire crew is back. You have destroyed the entire premise of the show. Now, we've got a claymation sequence. Like, it doesn't even make sense, right? Like, there's no alternate reality nested inside a claymation alternate reality that makes sense as a thing you would do. But it's so crazy and fun. Like, how can you not love a show that does this?
I love the fact that they try and sort of palm it off, because I think it's Christine Kachansky says we're stuck in the screensaver, and I'm still thinking like, so why is it claymation? But I love the fact they identify that they're definitely in a virtual like a false reality. When it's Cat that identifies the escape routes, it's E. What is it? 11 sort of this is it's basically figuring out the exit in Roman numerals and this other stuff. Is EI11T? Is that right? Is it 11? No, E11T, isn't it? It's just, well, 11 in Roman numerals is IX. He's just like, yeah, we must be if he's figuring this out, this can't be real. Yeah, it's brilliant because again, like it's and also the fact that like it doesn't just it's not just a brief thing as well. Like they do a whole sort of bit there because Lister gets eaten by a shark in claymation, spat out, and it's it's back to being like, what is going on?
Yeah,
and you get a lot of that in this series of like just like what are they doing? And I think that's why it just gets braver and braver in some places. Which is when we'll get to the sort of the sadness of the end, but some of the stuff they get on, like you say, we've had dancing blue midgets, we've had claymation, we've had the crew back. You have sort of Crichton literally going crazy. It's just. This is a statement of intent. These first 3 episodes is if this had been the continuation that the BBC wanted to do, I would have been well on board.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's well stated. I think that's a very strong statement that this is a sort of like manifesto, a sort of like this is what we can do. And thinking about what you were saying about the dancing blue midgets, the claymation bit. This is those are both in episode 3. There's no way you do the dancing spaceships, right? These are shuttlecraft. There's no way you do dancing shuttlecraft being led by a cat and don't think like, okay, this is jumping the shark. This is so risky. This could so easily not work. And it's going to cost so much money to animate because you're not doing models of spacecraft
No.
dancing. This is pure CG, and this is not. I mean, it's a much slicker, bigger budget show every season, but this is still not a giant budget show. Why are we going to waste, $500,000 on dancing shuttlecraft for something that is almost certainly going to look terrible and fail? And yet it works. I mean, again and again, like the claymation, it's just taking risks, doing these things that are shocking that, and again, there's still some rough edges to the plot, but we don't care because the comedy is working, the timing's working, the pace is working, but it's also just willing to take these risks, and it has those what the hell am I watching moments that are exciting and good.
Yeah, it is. It's and that's the thing, isn't it? Again, like if I'm having fun, it's a bit like we said about the sort of the opening of Stoke Me a Clipper. This is the kind of stuff that we got glimpses of in season 7. Like that whole opening of Stoke Me a Clipper is this. It's them going, do you know what? Let's just be batshit crazy. You've got Ace Rimmer sort of sky surfing a crocodile, shooting at Nazis. That's amazing. And then it sort of, it never sort of finds that footing again. But now, for some reason, on season 8, they're just like, do you know what? That whole opening, we're going to do that. We're going to keep doing that because that's funny and we enjoy doing it. And I think they do. We'll go on to the next episode in a minute, but they do sort of hit a real. I think just to keep introducing interesting ideas and stuff and really playing these things up. And I think it's great. I think this whole season really starts to play those out. But before we do move on, those first 3 episodes, anything you want to say more about back in the red?
No, I think we've said it all, except, I just have a little note of right as they're around that comment between Lister and Rimmer, about officers and men of honor. Holly is convincing Rimmer to, Holly gets into the action, and Holly says, to Rimmer, we're giving you a second chance at life and an opportunity to screw it up in a new and original way. And the delivery is so much better than I could ever do. And, there are so many little lines like that and little touches. And again, there you feel like, oh, Holly's back. I forgot how much I miss Holly. So that's cemented by the fact that the timing is working, the lines are working, and that also gets it that Arnold's character, like, no, he's back to being the git, and he's going to screw everything up. And yeah, we've reverted this character, right? We know we've reverted this character. There was no way to take it after Ace Rimmer, right? But he's going to be a git in a new and original way, and we're going to make a joke of it. There are so many just little touches like that just work and are fun, and I can't say enough about that stuff.
No, but we end up, like I say, in that new status quo is the dwarf as we know them. So Dave Lister, Arnold Rimmer, Crichton, and Christine Kochanski, and the cat. Although you never see Cat in his cell. I've just realised that. All end up in prison. In the brig of Red Dwarf. It's on floor 13, and it's this big thing holding 200 prisoners. Apparently, they were transporting in secret. And they also get to join into the next episode. We start with them, and Lister has signed them up for something as a bit of a hobby thing. They're called the Canaries, and I like this bit again. This episode has got some good ideas in, but also I like this idea that they have this thing of the Canaries, like they use prisoners as basically sort of like into the breach. You are the guys that's going to go first, so if you die, we know it's too dangerous. The irony is that sort of like they highlight how dangerous and sort of like stupid it is for joining this crew, but all I kept thinking was, for the last 5 seasons, that's what they've been doing anyway.
Right. Yeah. They're constantly going into situations where they have no idea what it is. I didn't think of that, but you're absolutely right.
And if anything, they're going to have better equipment that works instead of a side scan that sort of keeps failing or whatever. But
not to mention a bunch of other crew members backing them up. And one of whom is psychotic and is like, all right, I'm ready to kill.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking of Starship Troopers. I mean, that guy is clearly straight out of Starship Troopers, right? I mean, this is the like, hey, it's good. We get to go in, we're gonna see some action, kill some bugs,
Yeah.
and it is very Starship Troopers. Even the kind of like fascism of using prisoners.
Again, but they can't help but pull a prank on him. So again, his name's Kill Crazy, which is they're not being subtle in any way. And he's at the front of the queue. He's about to storm into this other ship that they're being sent to investigate. And what's he do? Hits his head on the bulkhead as he goes through the door and knocks himself out for the entire mission. It's good. It's good stuff. I mean, they're underwater. They've got to go to. They found this ship, and they find a computer on there called Cassandra, who can predict the future with 100% accuracy. So basically, she can see the future. And again, this sort of introduces some interesting elements. Like she says to them, all of you, everyone but Kachansky, Lister, Crichton, and the cat are going to die. And Rimmer is going to die in this horrible, horrible way. And then they introduce this idea of like, well, can you change? Are there ways of changing that and getting around that and all this other stuff? And again, it's not quite time travel, but it's still that deterministic sort of prediction of the future, isn't it? Can you change the future? So, what are your thoughts on this episode? This concept they have of Cassandra.
Yeah, I'm not sure how she can predict the future, but I mean, it's an entertaining episode. I think that getting to the depiction of the future, we've talked previously about the sort of deterministic model versus the like you can change things model, and this is ostensibly in the deterministic model where it's clever that Crichton says now we can't die, since we've been told that we're going to survive, so they're just firing guns at each other and it just doesn't work. But when they fire it at Rimmer, it fires for real. And then Cat, hits them and they're like, we can still feel pain, you idiot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're in this deterministic model. But then ultimately you find out that, this prophecy about Rimmer dying, this is to manipulate Rimmer into being killed by Dave. And there are certain prophecies that are a lie, and they are essentially vengeance on Dave because Cassandra, this computer, knows that Dave is going to kill her. And so, at the end, there's this very satisfying business of Dave saying, I'm not going to do it. And he sticks his gum into the wall and it causes a chain reaction that ends up short-circuiting the computer and, prophecy fulfilled. And I find that, that's very fulfilling. All of the, it's not as much fun as, say, Future Echoes, but it's doing something different. And all of the ways in which it manages to, I think it's very clever that it manages to change, not change time, but change this seemingly infallible prophecy, while also staying within a deterministic model and not, because there is a viable excuse, you're not actually changing anything. I think it's very clever. It's not the best episode, but, it works. It's a clever one.
I quite enjoy it. I mean, there are certain parts where I say about the deterministicness. I mean, she predicts at one point that the way Rimmer is going to die is that our Rimmer, Arnold, is going to die, making love to Kachansky, and it's not, so it can't happen. And then a series of events, end up with her being naked in a sort of trapped in there with Rimmer. Like, she gets clothes get soaked and all this other stuff, and it's sort of. It's funny, and it shows how this sort of thing is. If you are told something's going to happen, do you give into it? Because she literally does. That's her point, and she thinks, well, we're all going to die now, or she knows she's not going to die, but we're actually in a situation. So she's like, I can't believe I'm going to sleep with Rimmer, and he's like, I can't believe you're going to sleep with me. But she could always just say no, but she's almost like she's willing to give in to that because she's like, well, that's what the future. I've been told that's what the future is, and we've seen that it's always going to happen. So, I have to give into it. which is interesting. But obviously, it turns out to be a lie. But yeah,
Yeah, I think there's some line about how like I've never been seduced by determinism before.
yeah,
Something, like this is a very strange seduction technique. Like, I know you're going to sleep with me. It's been prophesized. It's gonna happen. So make your peace with it, okay? I mean, this is so they have a lot of fun with that. But the main thing that I found the funniest about that is that Cassandra prophesies not only that Rimmer and Kachansky are going to sleep together, but that Lister will be the one to kill Rimmer and will kill Rimmer using a harpoon gun. And the first time you hear this, you think, what are, first of all, it's ridiculous Kachansky would sleep with Rimmer. Secondly, it's ridiculous to think that Rimmer's going to die from a harpoon gun to the head. And then you watch it all play out to the point where the script could easily go that direction if it wanted to. It's almost like they're saying, see, we could do this if we wanted to, but yeah, that's a lie. And, we're going to go this other way.
Yeah, and it's good. It is fitting back into that thing. And again, I kind of like the reason that Cassandra's there, because again, it's a ship with no crew on, so they're being sent because they're like, well, why is there no crew on this ship? And Crichton sort of works it out, and she sort of confirms it that, well, her being around to determine everything, it's sort of like it was a real problem. She didn't crash. She was literally sent out into space to crash. Like, she was sent away. There was a choice was made to get rid of her. She was unable to stop that. So again, I find that interesting that she was created, and instead of just turning her off, which apparently appears to be a thing because Lister sort of does it,
Right.
they shoot her into space. So I kind of like this idea as well, that actually knowing the future isn't great. It can actually really, and you see that with Kachansky, like, she makes a conscious decision to go, well, I've been told that's the future. I've seen that these predictions are always right, so I've sort of got to give into it. So the power of being able to do that, have that in the form of a computer, could be incredibly powerful. So again, I understand why they would get rid of her.
I don't. I mean, I'll take it, but no. I mean, we're in a world where they want androids to appear more or less human. I mean, it's an excuse to, it's interesting.
Yeah, I like it. I think it's, like you say, it's a bit of it's a bit of a palate cleanser after the first 3 episodes. You've had this sort of like, this 3-parter. This has some crazy moments in it. You're re-baselining everything, and so you sort of get this. Cassandra as an episode sort of acts as a bit of a palate cleanser, isn't it? It's sort of like, okay, we're doing this, and this is how we're doing it, and it introduces some of the prison scenario as well, which I quite like. So I think it's I think it's a solid episode in this new lineup, which is good.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially considering it's going to be followed by another crazy episode, really, because Cassandra is followed by Crikey TV, which sort of hinges on this premise that Crichton has been, because he's a robot and he doesn't have a penis, he has been designated as a woman, and so is in the female prison section. He is at some point sort of stopped. He's sort of kidnapped, reprogrammed, and then uses his optics cameras to basically broadcast shower time, and he introduces Crikey TV for pay-per-view, and becomes like basically a bit of a kingpin in the prison. It gets even weirder. But what are your thoughts on Crikey TV?
I like it. It is a potentially the reality TV aspect of it is, I think, the strongest part, right? And Crichton sort of becoming a sort of kingpin, immortal prison guy is a lot of fun. Having said that, I mean, this is one of the most sexist episodes, and there's a lot of stuff in these seasons that is potentially disturbing. I mean, you were mentioning taking off, and how in reality in back in the Red 3 that the real woman at the control tower is, a fatter black woman. Well, I mean, this probably wouldn't go over today. It would be seen as sort of, fat shaming or something. Here, the whole reason why Crichton is in the woman's ward is because he doesn't have a penis. All right. Well, today, I mean, that is incorrect, right? I mean, that it would not be trans friendly, to say the least. And, the idea of filming women in the shower, including your only female cast member, and using it as a joke. I mean, they acknowledge it's a bad thing to do, right? But, I mean, I think this would be, I mean, this is a major crime. This is, this is a little like going back to sort of Revenge of the Nerds. It's funny because, the rape was of a nerd in disguise or something. It is a little uncomfortable.
It is, and I think they try and get around it in several ways, don't they? Because they use the fact that if any of the others had done this, if it had been Rimmer or Lister, it would be a real issue. The reason it works with Crichton is because he can be reprogrammed. So it's not like it's not like it's his choice. Like, he has literally been changed in order to do this. So you can sort of forgive Crichton because it's not who he is. Like, can get changed back and he'll be very apologetic. And the other thing as well is the people that do that to him are criminals. Like, it's Kill Crazy and a couple of his mates. So again, you're a bit like, okay, it is uncomfortable as a premise, but the people that are doing it, they circumvent that by saying, okay, here's the people that have done it are pretty despicable anyway. But I also like the way it backfires on them as well. So they basically set it up so he's going to do it, and he gets like a glimpse. This is going to harken back to maybe a very British thing and something of a youth thing. There used to be, when Sky first came out, they would have like pornographic channels that would scramble after a certain time. And so you get like a 10-minute glimpse, a titillation and a bit of sort of a preview. So you'd have that 10 minutes and you can go, oh, so that 10 minutes last night, and then, you might watch static for the next sort of 5 minutes just to see, just in case. But then, and that's what sort of Crichton does. He gives them sort of a few minutes of titillation by seeing the women in the show, and then says, like, and now I'm going to stare at a cracked floor tile. And you sort of, they're like, what's going on? And it turns out it's pay-per-view. So you've got to donate. So they see them all sort of stucking stuff into buckets because it's a trade sort of barter system. I think that's funny because, again, it's sort of like, it's backfiring. It's that sort of a thing. That thing we keep saying about Red Dwarf is that careful what you wish for because it never quite works out. So Crikey TV, the sort of the titillation or the exploitation element of it never quite works out. But the other thing, it's funny because, again, like, Lister eventually goes and sees Crichton about and says, "Come on, this is really not a good thing to do," and he admits it to Kachansky. But I also like the fact that, like, he did sit there for the 3 hours of it as well.
Yeah.
Right. And everything else. It's uncomfortable at times, but I think it's funny enough that they, I can get round some of that stuff in my own head. I'm like, okay, it's not terrible.
Well, and you're right. Kachansky does call him on it, right? So Kachansky there is sort of like being the voice of the person saying, this is super creepy, and you're not innocent because you didn't pay for it or approve of it. You still sat there, Yeah. So the show does give a voice to that.
It does. It sort of tries. I mean, but then it's sort of accompanied by some interesting jokes that, I think just before the confession, sort of Crichton calls Kachansky in and says, "Oh, Mum, I've got a problem with your fear of verrucas." And you think he's going to give her some sand or something, and he offers her a waterproof pogo stick.
Yeah.
Which is, ridiculous, but it makes me laugh. I think it gets a chuckle out of me. So, yeah, the first half of the show with the sort of the in the filming in the showers is funny, but like you say, I think it's almost designed to be awkward and uncomfortable, because I think this is when like reality TV was starting to really take off as well. That sort of like the late '90s.
Yeah.
And it's then followed by a prank show as well, which has been around for many years as well. So the second half of the show really is, Crichton uses his power to get reassigned into the male. Well, I like the joke, but basically the women found out what he was doing, and because of that, they've reclassified him as a man. But it's only there to play a joke on Dave. He tells Dave Lister that Kachansky's going on a date with her former boyfriend Tim and all this other stuff, and he gives him directions to go to what he thinks are Tim's quarters, to lay out a whole bunch of horrible hideousness across the room. It turns out, though, it's not. It's the warden's room,
Right.
which is a prank, which again is quite funny. So, what are your thoughts on the second half?
Yeah, I mean, I think it works. I mean, the thing that I would say, I mean, I don't love this episode, but I think it works. I think one of the things that has stood out about this episode in retrospect and in talking about it here is that it is really the one episode that takes place entirely in the prison. Because we have this new status quo, basically they're prisoners for the entire season, right? I mean, there's a 3-part intro, but we have a whole season in which they're in prison on Red Dwarf. I mean, that's awesome. But the previous episode, they're Space Marines, right? I mean, that makes sense. But I mean, they're able to go out and do the normal stuff, right? This is the only one that takes place really in the prison. And then the next 2-parter sort of takes place in the prison, but really they have the run of the ship. And then that kind of continues into the last one. But this is really the only episode where the entire plot is based on we're in prison and the story takes place entirely in there. And I think that is, to be able to do that shows a tremendous versatility, and again, that you can change the status quo and it still works. I mean, obviously you have, this should not work in any way, shape, or form. You've got the new status quo, Red Dwarfs around, and they're in prison. And so here's a whole story that revolves around making money in prison and the evil stuff you get up to, basically, selling cigarettes or, whatever.
Yeah, and I like it because he even pays off the guards, don't he? They call him Mr. Crichton, sir, and all this other stuff. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in this episode that I really like. I mean, there's little jokes as well that I think, the fact that Crichton is wearing a beard, when he's sweeping up outside the warden's room, he's obviously sort of like, he's filming it. It's a bit of a 2-part joke. I mean, the joke is obviously he's completely recognisable with the beard on or off anyway. But it also harkens back to, in this country, there was a show called Beadle's About. And it was a guy called Jeremy Beadle, and he would do pranks on people like this. And then he would sort of like, be around. I suppose it'd be like Candid Camera, really. They do a prank on someone, then he'd reveal himself at the end, like, take off a beard or a wig or something like that. And they'd be like, oh, it was all a joke. That wasn't really my van that went into the Thames or something like that. And so I think it's supposed to be a bit of a joke on that as well. So I do. I think the episode works. I like the corruption of Crichton, and the way they play it all out. But the other thing I think that works quite well for me in this episode and shows another side of like the Weasleyness of Rimmer is at the very start of the episode, Lister is given back his guitar, but then when he gets it, it's got no strings, and it's just played off as a bit of a joke. It's sort of it's a small moment. And then later on, you find out that Lister receives a letter saying that his appeal is coming up. Like, they can appeal, but they've got to be on their best behaviour. And so when Rimmer reads it, he reads it as like they're on appeal for everything, so they could actually get out of prison. This could be it. This could be the thing for them. They've just got to be on the appeal. So he clings to that to make sure that they don't get caught and everything's done by the book. And he keeps sort of saying, like, what about the appeal? And it turns out the punchline of the whole episode, which I do quite like, as I actually really like, is the fact that the appeal wasn't about getting out. It was just about getting guitar strings for his guitar. And so throughout all this, Lister has been trying to make sure he can play his guitar, and Rimmer has been helping him get the one thing that, he really hates.
Yeah, I quite like that too, and that does seem like such a return to form. Like
Yes.
It doesn't amount to anything great, but it's such a sort of like clever little twist that's in character, where it gets at like ethically, why do we do good, right? Do we do good because we think we're going to go to heaven, or we're going to get an appeal? And obviously, in the case of Arnold Rimmer, that's the only reason why he does good.
Yes, yeah. What's in it for me? Yeah. So again, it's another sort of like, again, Cassandra sort of resets the status quo. Crikey TV, it's a good one in prison. Like I'm enjoying this series so far. Like we're 5 episodes in, and if this had been the continuation, I'm still pretty on board. The next 2, 6 and 7, is a 2-parter. I'd say this is a true 2-parter. Again, we've got that. It's just called Pete, and Pete is the name of a sparrow. But I like this. This almost feels a bit like I've said it before, a bit like a Simpsons episode. In that it starts in one place with a quite a good reoccurring joke, and goes it ends up in a very different place. But yeah, and it even works together really as a single episode, obviously, because it's a really, I think it's a good solid 2-parter. But what are your thoughts on Pete, parts 1 and 2?
Yeah, I like it. I like part 2 better. I think part 1, it takes a little while to get going, and as you say, it sort of, begins as one thing and becomes another. The idea that the captain would sentence them to play basketball against the guards is so ridiculous, and doesn't really work for me. But what really works for me is the captain. We see a lot more of him here. They keep getting called before the captain, and this goes on and on and on, especially in part 2. Every 5 minutes, they're summoned back in front of the captain, and that's a idea that goes back to the earliest episodes of Red Dwarf, of sort of Rimmer toadying up to the captain, and obviously Lister having to stand up to the captain about having the cat. The captain seems remarkably invested in these 2 prisoners, even these 2 characters early on. But that is a running gag that ultimately pays off at the end with the captain going insane. And that works for me remarkably well. And the other star of this, I mean, just amazing star of these 2-parters, besides Pete, and we'll get into that later, are the Scudders. That the Scudders are back. And, these are the little robots that, look like the MST3K guy with the, and, we've talked about them before, like around season 2, and how much we like them, and, but they're back. Obviously, they've been reconstructed by the nanites, and they're secretly running like illegal goods for for Lister, and Lister has them, bringing things to him, and they're bringing drugs to him, and he sprays them with like WD-40 as like their reward, which doesn't really make sense, but it's funny and clever. And so I just love the Scudders. I love and I love the captain.
Yeah, again, like they say, this thing of them being brought back in front of the captain, because every time something goes pear-shaped, is it's good. It's just sort of, again, it's that sort of it's almost like an old school sitcom, isn't it? That repeat gag of just being caught out in every plan they do, it goes slightly wrong. And I think one of my favorite ones is they get sentenced to. Like I said, the basketball doesn't make a great deal of sense, other than for them to basically give the guards a chance to punch the crap out of the people. But and even the fact like the way they solve it by giving them all sort of like erectile dysfunction medication is funny, but doesn't quite sort of make sense. But my favourite one is when they get sentenced to sort of peeling spuds, peeling potatoes for however much they've got to do, and they end up sort of using a programmable virus. Like they've not learnt their lesson at all for some of the stuff that's gone in the past, and they've programmed it to just eat the skins off potatoes, so they are left with the peeled potatoes, and it'll just happen in minutes. And then it starts to eat their clothes and their hair and all this other stuff. But there's just a scene of like first it attacks Rimmer. It eats his sleeve and then it eats a bit more and this other stuff, and then just sort of like this thing of like Lister laughing his ass off at Rimmer, sort of trying to bat it all down, and his clothes disappearing bit by bit, and then you see Rimmer's do the same. It just makes me laugh. I just thought the whole section was really good. And again, it's just these repeat gags. Like it's just quick fire, isn't it? A lot of times they're just hitting you with a lot of stuff, whilst they're setting up this bigger thing as well. Because the bigger thing is that. Go on.
Well, I agree the erectile dysfunction thing doesn't work very well. I agree completely with everything you've said. The potato peeling gag, what I love about it most is, I mean, you sort of see where it's going, but then they haven't been decontaminated when they go before the captain. And so, Arnold like shakes his hand and the captain touches his head and his clothes are coming off. His hair is coming off. So, I love watching the captain physically deteriorate over the course of these 2 episodes. It's not just that he is just angrier and angrier with them, but he's lost his hair. I mean, there's this kind of like, you mentioned Preacher, that's sort of like the deterioration of Star over the course of the series that, he loses multiple body parts. And there's a sort of thing happening in miniature with the captain here, psychologically and physically deteriorating. And by the end, he's got a sling around his entire head. He's been injured, so to me, that got me.
I agree. Yeah, because by the end he actually can't talk, can he? He actually puts up his notes saying, "I've got PTSD." May not talk for 12 months. But yeah, because the other thing that's going on is they've been on another mission as Canaries, and they come across a time wand, and the time wand does different things. The rules for the time wand are a little iffy, I'll be honest. But it does what you need it to do. Basically, it's a magic wand that can either, de-evolve or evolve, or people, clothes, time, all kinds of. It can freeze time. It can do all kinds of things. But it's a useful story beat. That in series, if it had been in series 7, I would probably be ripping to pieces. But it just sets up a gag, really, doesn't it? That they, because Lister and Rimmer get put in the hole, and in there they meet a small Welshman and his pet sparrow, Pete, Birdman. He's just called Birdman, and his pet sparrow, Pete. And the excitement of being released kills Pete, and in the final sort of thing towards the end of the first part of Pete, Crichton attempts to use the time wand to return Pete to his physical fitness, but instead reverts him back to and devolves him to become a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yes.
So now we have a dinosaur running around Red Dwarf.
Yeah, I quite like that. I mean, I think the dinosaur bit works completely for me. One of the worst episodes of the Moffat Who era is Dinosaurs on a Spaceship. And it is such a, like, this should work, right? Like this should be so much fun, and nothing in it is fun, and none of the timing works. And I get that maybe kids will like it, but I mean, none of the timing works. It's not fun. This is fun. Um,
Mm.
it's fun seeing, this is literally a dinosaur on a spaceship. It's another one of these just out of the box crazy ideas. Um, and here again, like the CGI is so much better this season. Like, we talked about that with the dancing blue midgets, but here the dinosaur actually looks good. And in part two, it begins with the obviously the dinosaur. I think it's the end of part one that it eats. It kills Birdman, right? It eats
Yeah,
its former master, and then in part two, it eats the Scudder and the Time Wand,
yeah,
and you actually see the Scudder inside the digestive tract, inside the stomach of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, like poking his head out of the stomach acid, which is quite charming and bizarre. Um, and then pretty much through the whole episode, first they're trying to keep it secret, and they feed it Vindaloo, of course. Here's a Vindaloo gag that works for me. They put a cow in it, and the idea is that they're going to get it to pass the time wand. And you actually get a close up of the dinosaur's eyes go wide from the spicy
yeah,
Vindaloo, which is a Vindaloo gag that works for me.
yeah,
And ultimately the crew wakes up from their suspended animation. They're being frozen by the time wand, and then the crew begins to chase it. And that's how the captain gets injured again by a 15-foot tidal wave of diarrhea from the back end of that, which is gross but quite funny. I mean, just, and that's the end of a litany of, like, do you know what happens when you feed
yeah.
a Tyrannosaurus Rex Vindaloo? It burps. Oh yes, and it goes through this long thing, this litany that ends up in diarrhea, and how people keep dying from these gross out moments. So all of that works for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think this episode is one of those ones where it's sort of like they've just hit their stride and they're having fun, and it's sort of like they're going to keep pushing the boundary. I mean, like you say, the time one free they've frozen the crew so that they can go and enjoy. They're having a meal in the sort of one of the cargo bays, and the idea is they can get the time one back. They can actually, the idea is they can compress time, whatever, and they can actually their 2-year sentence can be gone in a matter of seconds. And yeah, so it just sort of all comes together. It's ridiculous, and again, like I said, the special effects work better. But even like I say, that they understand that their limit. I think the thing is they understand their limitations. Because again, the things that sort of happen to the captain are good, like I say, because they feed him a whole bunch of Vindaloo, and then he goes, because it's so spicy, the T Rex goes off and eats sort of like 2 tons of choc chip ice cream and orange popsicles and a bunch of cola. And then so it burps, and when it burps, after it's burped and eaten all that, it's sick, and then after that it gets attacked of diarrhea. And
God.
it's just like the way the captain reels it. He said, "Do you know what happens then?" And it's sort of like, oh my god, it's vile and horrible.
And you know what's coming, right? I mean, the poop is going to come, but
Yeah,
it's it's
building
funny
up.
because it starts with burping, and then
Yeah,
it gets sick, and you think, oh, okay, they didn't go for the real big gross out, and it just
yeah.
keeps escalating.
It just keeps going. Like you say, it escalates. And I like the fact that at the end of it, Rimmer says, I think you missed some with your left nostril, sir." um, but it does. It keeps going. I thought the payoff of this, was going to be, oh, they killed it, and they're going to have to clean. Because he keeps giving them more and more punishments. You're going to have to clean that up. But he doesn't. He hands them back the time wand and says, nobody else can seem to get this to work. Just for some
Yeah.
reason, Crichton can. You're going to go fix this. Go fix this. Go get that dinosaur sorted. And they do, in true sort of true dwarfer fashion, they do. They get it sorted. They turn him back to Pete, and they bring back Birdman. And I like the fact that Birdman's first response is, "Oh, Pete ate me," is really quite upset about that. You never understand why he's in the hole though. Like he's obviously done something terrible to have been in the hole that long. But the one thing they didn't realise is that this Pete as a T-Rex also laid an egg. And the final one of the bits at the end which I really like is you go back to Captain Hollister after all this stuff. He's trying to de-stress. He's having a massage. And then it turns out that the baby, they're chasing down the baby dinosaur, and that goes in and starts licking his back. And it ends then with him sort of then being called back to the captain's office, and he can't talk, and that's when he's like, "I have PTSD." It's like a bridge too far.
He sentences them to 12 months in the hole. And then you find out, no, he's sentencing himself to that.
It's the only
so
safe
I mean,
place.
the captain has been utterly reduced to.
Yeah,
it's quite funny.
And again, there's a great bit in I think it's just the first one. I think it's the first one when they've been affected by the time wand and they're actually in a different time stream, but they get beaten up by two of the other prisoners.
Oh no, that's in part 2. Yeah, this is very good.
Yeah, and they've been beaten up, and they're sort of like, "Why aren't we getting hurt?" And Crichton's like, "Oh, because you're in a different time scale." But then time catches up to them as they're sort of stood talking to Captain Hollister, and it starts with Lister being punched in the face and flying back through a screen, and then Rimmer gets knocked about and stuff like that. It's the pair of them do a fantastic. The physical comedy in that moment is brilliant, and I'm really impressed with it.
Absolutely.
So
it also like the camera also cuts very cleverly there. It's very well cut. It's rapid. So often on Red Dwarf, like I mean, even last season we had them in Duct Soup, where supposedly the wind was blowing them down the duct, and it's clearly just the actors rolling turtle bug style, just sped up, right?
Yeah.
The difference between that and this is amazing. And a lot of it is just, doing rapid cuts, knowing what you're doing there.
I agree. It's well paced, well timed, and well acted. It's one of those things that just comes together, isn't it? Like a good crew, and the editing suite pays off at the end. So, no, it's a well done. I think that's a great moment. But you're right. I think these episodes are just good fun. And they really are throwing stuff out there that just like shouldn't work. You should be like groaning at this, but I'm really enjoying it.
Well, there are a few additional things in the part 2. I love Rimmer in front of the captain saying, I hope this one small dinosaur incident won't tarnish our records. And when they see the egg, as the egg begins to hatch, little dinosaur feet come underneath it and it runs away, and it's so cute. But we haven't even mentioned, again, if this were in the previous season, we'd have all these objections because there are so many different plots going on. This is such a mess, but it all works. Then there's Crichton's penis, and you hear that Crichton, Kochanski is looking for a mouse, and Crichton says, "Oh, it's not a mouse, it's my penis." And this is his solution to being in the women's world, the women's ward, as he says, quite problematically, genitally challenged. So he's made himself a penis, and it's run off, right? And then later on, it appears inside Kat's uniform, and it's impersonating a chest hugger, like thumping through, and Crichton says, "Don't be alarmed, just my penis is on the loose." So I mean, the penis stuff is very funny.
It is, yeah. I mean, he's called it Archie. The fact he's named it. But also, they say, I love Kochanski's line. It's like, no, Crichton, you are most definitely finally a man because you can't control. Yeah, of all men, you can't control your penis.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good. Again, like she. I think Chloe Annette doesn't do. I wouldn't say she's wasted. She doesn't get a great deal to do in this series. But when she is on it, she's good. Like she's
Mm-hmm.
actually very good in this series. And I'm saddened to say she doesn't return.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it's a good two-parter. It's a solid, but there's a lot going on, and there are moments when I think it drags a little bit because they're trying to fill a two-parter. The moment when they're behind a big steel door, which is sort of I think the end of one, end of part one and start of part two. But they're behind a steel door that the dinosaur is trying to beat down. And there's a couple of gags there, but that does go on for a little bit too long. Like you can see where they're like, okay, we've got to fill 2 half-hour segments, so let's do this. But other than that, like I think it's a really solid sort of two-parter. And again, like you say, the fact they're doing multiple part episodes in this series, not just if they did it for just the opening, fine, I'd be like, okay, that's cool, that makes sense. But the fact they drop one in later in the series as well is, and not even for the final episode, which would be
Right.
the usual typical thing, isn't it? So they're not just doing these things. Like they clearly have ideas that they want to do things with. So where we kept saying that sort of like season 7 just wasn't thought out enough, sort of like an idea that's sort of just been thrown together and that's it. This feels a lot more thought out and a lot more edited to form something a bit more coherent.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that Pete is a great example of that because there's so many different plots going on. I mean, you have these guys who beat them up. I mean, yes, it's a gag that's tied to the time wand. Yes, it allows them to misbehave in front of the captain again. But I mean, those guys wind up regressed into apes, de-evolved.
Yeah.
I mean, this is that's just like a little silly gag. But there's so much. I mean, there's the penis that's running around. I mean, which by the way is way better than Crichton's hand, which we've seen running around. But if that script were not tweaked, it's a kind of kitchen sink script where everything's thrown in there. I mean, you've got the Birdman of Alcatraz, everything is in there, but somehow it's just been polished enough that the jokes land. And again, the timing is right. Maybe again, it's that studio audience, but the timing's right. The actors seem like they're having fun, and it definitely feels as if that script has been polished in a way that that previous season scripts haven't.
Yes, it's been given that just a little bit more attention, or that little bit more polish off. That just one more go over, I suppose. Okay, so we are going into the final episode, only the good. And considering everything that's gone really well before, this one's interesting. I mean, it sort of starts. You've got Rimmer is now on probation, or they're all on sort of probation. They've got a different sort of slightly different setup. Because they're about to get off, and we find out that the ship is being attacked by a microbe that is eating away the plastic, or everything other than glass, which is quite funny, of the ship. And so it sort of leads to a cliffhanger, which we'll get to in a minute. But this is a final episode, sort of. So, what are your first thoughts on this final episode of this series?
I like this less than most of the preceding episodes. I still think it's good. I mean, if this were in the previous season, again, only the Ace Rimmer episode would be better than it. But it is one of the weaker episodes, and I think it is sort of, a little muddled, at least compared to the other episodes. These microbes, to start with, these microbes feel entirely too much like the nanomachines. And in my recollection, I remembered this as the nanomachines. I didn't remember this as, it's a separate microbe thing that, has been contracted. So, there's that. Then there's, this sort of, I do like the plot about the food dispenser that's mad at Rimmer for stealing a choco nut bar.
Yeah.
and it pays off at the end. I quite like that. The machine says, "You are my nemesis. Our paths will cross again, and on that day I will destroy you." And predicts that And Rimmer says, "And on that day I'll be captain." And of course that comes true by the end of the episode. The jokes about Kachansky's period and sort of Lister getting Crichton to make a fool of himself, and Crichton getting revenge with this illegal whiskey or hooch in which they have to drink, which is very silly slapstick. It's not terrible, but it doesn't work at the level that the rest of the season works. You would agree with that?
Yeah, I would. I think again, this to me harkens back a little bit to the problems of Series 7, in that, okay, we've got a point to meet, how do we get there? And then they sort of seem to go around it, and weirdly they meander a little bit on this one. Again, I actually thought the same about the nanos. And actually, look, my question is, why isn't it the nanos?
Yeah.
You've already got something, that can do what this is doing. So why not just make it the nanobots and say, right, they've rebelled, we haven't thanked them, or so there's something you haven't. It could be as stupid, couldn't it? Like, it could be as daft as like, well, we didn't thank them, so they're now taking the ship back, or something like that. But yeah, it's fine. I think the whole bit where I say we're celebrating Kachansky's period, sort of like, there's some interesting, there's some funny bits in that. I think again, like Robert Llewellyn's Crichton, so there's some good gags.
Yeah. Yes.
It's good. It just feels like it's trying to get to a point. And the bit, even the bit in the alternative, the mirror universe, again, sort of like is that a dig at Star Trek, or a little Star Trek nod? But they're going into the mirror universe. Like, some of it feels okay, but the bit with we found out at the very beginning of the episode, sort of Captain Hollis is ill and Rimmer is sort of acting as his nursemaid, or sort of like almost like an assistant. And this woman comes to see him, and sort of like you don't know the relationship, and then eventually later on you learn out. First she's just called sister, so he plays it up like after trying to snog her, and then it turns out she's not his sister but a sister, in the fact that she's a nun, and it's again, it's sort of like, it feels fine, but it's not great. It feels like Series 7 kind of humor. I'm like, okay, that feels a little, I don't know, that doesn't work for me, that bit. And the whole bit of Rimmer in the mirror universe, there's gags that work, but it feels like it's falling back onto old tropes. Do you know what I mean? So, you get some Kachansky's really intelligent and competent, although in prison in our universe. In the other one, she's like a bubblegum chewing sort of like bit of a ditz that works as a secretary for a professor who is the cat. So you get Danny John-Jules playing the professor character, which is, akin to him being Dwayne Dibley. It's sort of, and so weirdly, you never get to see a mirror universe version of Dave. I don't know. It's fine, but it just feels a bit meandering to get to a point, really. The reason I feel that this episode, I'm sad about this episode, really, is I have liked everything being back on Red Dwarf.
Yes.
And the end of this episode really is them taking that away again. I'm just like, oh no, don't do that. Although it does start a sort of almost like a Battlestar Galactica kind of sort of scenario where you've actually now got a fleet of ships trying to do something, but I don't know what they would have done with it. But it feels a bit like, again, this is the sort of thing that they seem to do now. Right, we are going to introduce a cliffhanger that we're then just going to click our fingers and we'll be out of.
Yeah,
those sorts of things. But in this one seemed different to me, even then, in that, I could be wrong, because they completely destroyed the entire crew and Starbuck and everything at the end of season 6, and they still managed to sort of just click their fingers and be out of it. But with this one, like, you don't see for a large part of the end of the episode. Like you don't see the original Red Dwarf
Right.
crew. You just have Rimmer going around the mirror universe.
Right.
And then when he comes back, they're all gone. They've escaped and left him behind.
It's very strange.
Yeah, but what makes it weirder and sort of makes me wonder more about this is he's visited by death.
Yeah.
And he knees death in the nuts and then does a runner. And it gets this weird metaphysical place that Red Dwarf has never gone to before. And so this cliffhanger, you see when the ship starts to come apart, you see blue midgets and starbugs sort of leaving the ship, like the crew have all
Right.
escaped. And the original, our Red Dwarf crew are sort of left behind. And all this other stuff. But then like the ending, the second half of the episode, I don't know, it just feels weird. Like, you know, and it sort of says the end, the smeg it is. And I'm just like, but I don't know where you're going to go with this. I don't know what you're going to do. I don't know what you're trying to achieve. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's confused and confusing.
Yeah.
I agree that, you know, a lot of stuff, you know, is sort of not necessarily misfiring, but sort of not landing the way it should. You know, there's that business before the mirror universe where they're all meeting in sickbay, and Kat picks a fight in order to get beaten up and sent to sickbay. And it's done very well. You know, Kat mugs expecting, you know, a punch, and then the guy says, you know, oh no, I'm your bitch, you know, and then but I'm thinking, okay, so it's all well enough done, but I'm thinking, you know, why does Kat not just disguise himself and go into sickbay the way the other characters have?
Yeah.
And then when Kat fails to get beaten up, you never see that guy again, who's now Kat's bitch. Literally, that's the word he uses. And Kat just dresses up and goes into sickbay. What did we do that for? You know, the same thing. I mean, where did that mirror universe device come from?
That was the other thing I was going to ask. Like, it just comes out of nowhere. I don't
Yeah, it's
know.
like let's use that mirror universe device. You know, in the mirror universe, there's this joke is, you know, Rimmer's captain there, right? Although you never see the captain Rimmer, right? He doesn't appear. But Rimmer, lying in bed, looks at his penis underneath the sheets and says, "Oh, everything's different here. Oh my!" And the joke is his dick is big in the mirror
Yeah.
universe, but he's not the of mirror universe Rimmer, right? I
No.
mean, you know, I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Well, this goes back to the thing we said before about they're not following their own internal logic. I mean, you know, this was more a case of season 7, but that's what I'm saying. This feels more like season 7, this bit, because it doesn't follow any logic. Like technology pops up out of nowhere that's never been mentioned before. The rules of the mirror universe are never explained, never seem to be followed.
Yes.
You know, because it's never been mentioned before. You know, he gets the code for the alkaline solution that's the antidote. He gets it written down, brings it back. Oh no, it's turned into the it's now the code for the virus. You know, that sort of thing. Like it just
Yeah, that's a
I don't know.
clever idea, but it doesn't
Yeah,
make sense, right? I mean, you've written something, it doesn't, you know, like there's also the problem that often comes up in these stories of like, what is the opposite of X, right?
yeah.
The opposite of a cure is a formula for the virus. I mean, does that make sense? But even if it does make sense, why, you know, why would something written change? I mean, does that mean like if you bring a copy of the Bible into the mirror universe, it becomes a copy of the Satanic Bible? I mean,
Mm.
is that, I mean, none of this really makes sense. You mentioned Kat as a professor. You know, that's like you said, I mean, it's a gag, it's a visual gag. We never see Kat do anything as a professor.
No, and that's the problem with it. It's sort of like the setup for all this. The fact that they've messed around. I mean, it's some of the funny stuff with the period stuff at the beginning, fine, But it's almost like they've crammed this all into the second half of a half-hour show, when really this should have been the whole show.
Yes, you're right.
And that's the problem with it. It's sort of like they've sort of meandered to get there, and then they go, "Oh Christ, we've got to zip through this and get to the end." And it's just some odd choices made for this final episode. And I'm not sure they ever had a follow up. And we're going to talk continuity. This is the final. This is the final episode of the BBC era. This is the cliffhanger that was left on in 1999, and it would take 10 years for them to come back in any form. But I know I'm going to have to watch it again to see if any of this gets resolved. But at the end of this series, you have got an entire crew of how many hundreds of people out in space in different small ships, and part of that is going to be a Kachansky, a Lister, a Crichton.
Oh, aren't they in the mirror universe? I mean, when Rimmer comes back, right?
Yeah.
In order to fulfill the gag about the vending machine, isn't he's told like, oh, he's the only one left, so that makes him the captain, right? So that fulfills the gag. And I thought that he's told that his friends have already gone into the mirror universe.
Oh, of course, yes, that's right. So they've all disappeared into the mirror universe. So he now escapes. Yeah, so our Red Dwarf is now on fire and breaking down, and we just see him running off. So does he go into the mirror universe and get them back? Does it? It's just, yeah, this is very confusing, as you say.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, it's easy to forget this stuff, right? Because we don't see that crew. We don't see anyone but Rimmer, right? We don't follow them into the mirror universe. We see that like Rimmer shows up and they're all gone, and then the virus has eaten the laser device that opens the mirror universe, but so it's like Rimmer's trapped on a ship that's decompressing. I mean, that's being destroyed. But, I mean, it feels like they just kind of, like, well, we didn't know how we were going to resolve any of those other cliffhangers, so let's just give them a fun cliffhanger and, and I mean, I guess you could have the others open a laser from the other side and save Rimmer, and then the show just continues on the Red Dwarf of the mirror universe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an easy solution, but yeah, it does feel confused and confusing.
Between this, we'll talk about it in the next show, but in the next one, it returns pretty much to that status quo. Dave or UK TV wanted it back to that status quo, so you end up with the four of them, Rimmer, Lister, Crichton, Cat on Red Dwarf.
Yes, right.
So I between this episode and next, I will do some research and I am going to create a continuity, a headcanon that exists that explains it, because it's got to be somewhere. Because it's like, it's a different TV channel, but you've got to have some sort of continuity, or some sort of resolution.
We didn't really between 2 and 3. I mean, I know there's a narrative crawl, but I mean, there's we don't really have any resolution there. This is bigger, but I mean, I remember at the time when Back to Earth, which is the 3-parter that constitutes season 9, when it first came out, they said it almost seemed like they were mad that they hadn't gotten an additional season. And so, what I read was, I mean, because I was so excited to have Red Dwarf back. And I remember reading online that, it seemed like, I mean, they said, look, we're not going to resolve that. We're going to pretend as if those additional seasons happened. And initially, they refused to call Back to Earth season 9. They said, like, in our minds, it's like, season 12 or something. And all those other seasons happened. And, and we're just never going to explain that.
Yeah.
And so now, obviously, because we've had 3 more seasons and a movie since then, retroactively, Back to Earth is 9. But I think the original intent was like, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that happened between those two. You know, you didn't give us the money to make it, so, F you.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. That's how TV stations work. I'm not sure that's how fans work, so I'm pretty sure there'll be something out there. I'll be interested to try that. I will take that as a mission. I will see if there is something somewhere that tries to address that. But that's it. That's where we're left. We have addressed Series 7 and 8. It's a bumpy ride between the two of them. Series 8 definitely stands out. Series 7 is the doldrums in many ways. Any final thoughts on these two series before we wrap up?
Just how shocked I was by how good Series 8 is. I did not remember it being this good, and I think it stands up with, I don't think it has as many classic episodes. Like I said, I mean, most of those early seasons have 2 or 3 that I think, oh, these are just great. I don't think it has, especially because it has those 2-parters. I don't know that it really has a single great classic episode in the same way, but it's fun all the way through. And that's better than the preceding season. So anyone who says that Red Dwarf just, is downhill after 5 or something, or whatever they say, just is incorrect. What about you?
Yes. No, the same. And I think going back to these was a bit of an eye opener because for me, for many years, I thought Series 7 was a goodie, and Season 8 was a bit of a duff one, and I hadn't revisited these in many years. So going back to them, it was a bit surprising to realise that actually Series 7 is a complete mess, and it is disappointing in so many ways. But Series 8 is actually, like I say, a lot of fun. It's clear that the crew and the sort of the cast are really enjoying it. It fires on sort of like almost all cylinders, and genuinely made me laugh. So no, I'm like you. I think it was good fun. I've really enjoyed watching Series 8 and going back and watching it. Now, from our point of view, though, we're going into, for you at least, we're starting to head into uncharted territory, aren't we?
Yeah, well, I have not seen. I saw Series 10. I don't think that I've ever seen 11 or 12 or this new movie.
Yeah, so we're starting to move towards sort of, let's say, slightly sort of uncharted territory. I've watched them all relatively recently. Actually, I sort of saw 11 and 12 at the start of this year on the app, and obviously I caught The Promised Land when it was aired on TV. So we will get to those very, very soon. But the next episode, we will be starting with the UK TV play, their first outing, which was Back to Earth, which is a 3-episode special, which aired in 2009. And then we shall go on from there. So yeah, but I'm really enjoying it. It's good. It's been a real sort of, as we sort of said in the last episode, labour of love. I think this is our 4th bonus episode into Red Dwarf. We're now clocking at just over 4 hours for this one. So this has been.
I know.
If anyone's ever done a more definitive, in-depth review of Red Dwarf, I'd love to see it. Because I tell you what, this is going to clock in at probably like, I don't know, a day's worth of podcast listening.
Yeah, something like that. 20 hours, 20.
Yeah, it's going to come to that. So I think,
we're insane, Scott.
It is, really are, but I'm loving it. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to be starting promoting. This hasn't started coming out yet, but the people that are going to listen to this are going to be amazed at some of the discussions. I don't think people have gone to this level of psychoanalyzing Red Dwarf characters to the level to which we have. So I'm really pleased with what we're doing, and I think hopefully it'll get some good attention. So, as usual, Julian, thank you so much for joining us, joining me on this deep space mission.
It's my pleasure, and I'm going to go research Lister Rimmer / fiction.
That's your mission. Do you know what? I'll leave that one to you. I will research the gap between Series 8 and Back to Earth.
All right. Well, I'm so glad to be doing this. Until next time, Scott.
Yes. Have a good one. And listeners, we'll see you soon.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.